want to tell y'all a little story. I remember it was my junior year in high school, and I wanted to try out for the track team. And so I tried out, I made the team, and my coach wanted me to be a long distance runner. I wanted to do something more cool. I wanted to do the hurdles. And so I said, Coach, is there any way that I could do the hurdles in competition? And he said, well, you're 5'3". I don't know how good you're gonna be at that, but we can give it a try in practice. And so I was super geek. I had the thought of like, what if I'm really good at this? What if I get to go to the Olympics? You know, all of the cool thoughts I had in regards to, running the hurdles. And so the coach let me do it. During practice, I was okay. And he gave me one opportunity to kind of compete in one of our semi-competitions. And so the day comes, and I literally start to panic. I had the thoughts of, what if I become the laughing stock if I'm not able to get over these hurdles? What if I fail? What if I just completely not do good? And I get to the track meet and I completely vomit. All over my suit, all over the floor, and I completely lose it. My coach comes over to me, he's like, Crystal, do you think you can do it? And I said, I think I can. So I get there, I'm on the track, and right before they go off with the starting pistol, I take a deep breath and I go. And listen, y'all, I missed every single one of the hurdles. It was the worst day ever for me. And that may not be your experience. Your experience may be different from mine. But the reality is this: we all have experienced fear in some shape or another. It may have kept us up from trying new things. It may have kept us from speaking up when we should have. It may have hurt our friendships. It may have created something that we say to ourselves in our own head that convinces us of things about ourselves that are not necessarily true. It may not be a scary movie type of fear that controls us, but it might be a type of fear that creates worry and anxiety in us that have a huge impact on our life. And I think it's pretty safe to say that fear is an emotion that we have all been controlled by in one way or another. The crazy thing about fear is that our ability to experience it is something that makes us uniquely human. Think about it for a second. Our fear comes from the fact that we can gather information and think about the future. And as humans, we can wonder those what if questions like I had. What if this happens? Or what if that happens? And that can make us afraid. We are where we are today because the human race has been able to learn things, build on what we've learned, and then project it into the future. The same ability that allows us to fear also allows us to imagine, have hope and dream and wish for really great things to happen in our life. So our ability to gather information and think about the future has two sides, the fear side and the hope side. I think we will all agree that the hope side is incredible. We love imagining, dreaming, and inventing. But then we have the fear side, the side that comes up with all the what ifs. And we all know that the what ifs makes us feel a little bit crazy. We are in another week in this series called Vibes. We've been talking about our emotions and the way they affect us and the world around us. And fear is one emotion that we all experience in our lives. But here's what's cool about it all. Jesus had a lot to say about fear. The problem is we tend to read verses where he talks about fear by themselves. And when we do that, they sound nice, but they don't seem possible or even practical. For example, Jesus said, "Fear not." In other words, when it comes to fear, just stop and quit. That's not exactly helpful though, right? So today, I want to look at a passage where Jesus talks to some of his close friends about fear. but with a little bit more context for all of us to get to know and learn a little bit better. Jesus had 12 main followers who were also his friends. He spent a lot of time with them because he wanted to teach them and to encourage them to do great things in the world. And at one point, he tells them this: "I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves." Just think about it for a moment. Wolves are predators and sheep are prey. So Jesus is like, you guys are the prey and I'm going to let you loose with a bunch of predators. And then he goes and gets a little more literal. He tells them that they will also be arrested and beaten. And to wrap it all up, he tells them not to be afraid. I don't know about you, but I will be afraid. We tend to read the story and stop there. But when you look at it in its full context, this is just one part. Before this conversation, there's another time Jesus was out with his disciples. Jesus took his friends on a trip. They were on a boat in the middle of a sea in Galilee, and while they were there, Matthew recorded this. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Jesus and his disciples are on a small boat in the middle of water, and without warning, a storm shows up. Think about it for a moment. The loud crashing from the waves, the wind that can literally blow you away, the rain that just keeps coming down, the bright lightning that lights up the sky full of dark clouds, and the thunder that shakes your chest. In the middle of it all, Matthew tells us that Jesus was sleeping. Can you imagine, just for one moment, either Jesus was faking it or he was actually in a real deep sleep? So as the disciples were scared out of their minds, as I would have been too, and their fearless leader was sleeping right through it, they did the same thing I think I would have done. They woke him up. Lord, save us. We are going to drown. Imagine just for a moment the disciples' frustration. They were trying to stay alive while Jesus was trying to take a power nap. This is how Jesus responds. You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Maybe Jesus was sleep talking? Because wouldn't it be obvious that they were afraid? I mean, who wouldn't be worried about dying? But Jesus was teaching them about fear. He wakes up and gets up, but he doesn't panic, which is good news for all of us. No matter how scary the circumstances, Jesus stays calm. Matthew says that Jesus spoke to the wind and the waves and they calmed down. Now the disciples were amazed. They responded by saying this: "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him?" In fact, they weren't just amazed, they were afraid. I mean, they literally asked, who is this guy who can calm down a storm? In a moment, their confidence in Jesus overwhelmed their fear of the storm. And that's the point of this field trip. Jesus took all of his disciples on to show them that their feeling of fear didn't have to control them or boss them around anymore. It was to show them that there is someone bigger and more capable. Jesus used the situation as a teaching moment. So let's go back to the conversation where Jesus says that he is going to send them out like sheep among wolves. Jesus follows that up by saying this: "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill your soul." In other words, if you are going to fear something, you might as well make sure it's the right thing or worth being afraid of. First, Jesus proves that God is bigger than the storm. Then he sends the disciples into dangerous situations like sheep among wolves. So imagine yourself as one of the disciples. And Jesus in this moment then points out and is like, you were afraid of the wrong thing on the boat. Sure, you had the right to be afraid, but didn't you know that there was someone with you who was more powerful than the storm? Jesus goes on, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." He's saying God is paying attention to you. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than the sparrows. Don't be afraid. God has numbered the hairs on your head. Don't be afraid. You are valuable. God is personal. He knows your name. He knows your circumstances. He's concerned with your personal life. When it comes to dealing with fear, this is a pretty big deal because God knows all about it and is with you in the middle of it. Now the account continues with Jesus and the guys on another field trip. So check this out. Here's what happens. Jesus has been preaching all day. It started to get late and people were getting tired and hungry. The disciples suggest that they send everyone home to eat, but Jesus seems to think that they can feed everyone, which sounds a bit crazy because no one has enough food or money to make that happen. But then Jesus gets a little boy's lunch. That's right, a little boy's lunch out of his little lunch pail. He prays over it, and then Matthew writes that Jesus split the boy's lunch between 12 disciples and told them to feed the crowd. And listen, y'all, it worked. Everyone got fed. It was a complete miracle. But before they have time to stay and enjoy it, Jesus tells the disciples to get in another boat. And they are probably thinking, Jesus, this is too soon. But they had to do what Jesus said. So soon after that, they hopped into a boat. But this was a little bit different because Jesus doesn't get in the boat with them. He tells them that he'll meet them on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So the disciple spends the night rowing, and at some point of the night, the waves get bigger and the wind blows wild. They looked over and around the water and can't believe what they see. It's Jesus walking on water. That is super wild, super crazy, and I can't even fathom that in my own mind. But Matthew records that the disciples were terrified. Obviously, right? Someone walking on water. In fact, they thought they were seeing a ghost. But then Jesus says something that gets their attention because they had heard it before. He goes to say, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." This is Jesus trying to remind them of all the lessons and field trips they've already had previously up to this point. They saw miracles, heard teachings, and yet still fear was in control of them. In fact, they remained fearful to the very end of Jesus' life. When we fast forward to the night that Jesus was arrested, we see the disciples abandon Jesus. Why, you might ask? Because they were afraid that if they stayed close by, they might be arrested too. And then Jesus was crucified. Were they there? No, they left because they were afraid. The next day after Jesus was buried, where were the disciples, you might ask? They were hiding in a room because they were afraid. But then Sunday came around, and the women who had followed Jesus went to the tomb and discovered that it was empty. They came back and told all the disciples, so the disciples went to the tomb, saw that the tomb was empty, and they thought to themselves, maybe someone stole the body. But then Jesus himself appeared before them, and they realized that he's alive. And here's the deal. When the guy you've been following dies and then comes back to life, suddenly everything he has to say to you before seems more real, true, and even more believable. For the disciples who loved and followed Jesus, the resurrection wasn't just a nice surprise. It was everything. It made them bold. It gave them strength. It put everything Jesus said about fear in its right perspective. Their world was crazy still, but because of the resurrection, the disciples and anyone who followed Jesus could put their fear in its place. It was like they finally understood the lessons from the boat. When all the things around them seemed so much bigger and so much scarier than they could handle themselves, now Jesus' words made sense. Fear not, I am with you, took on a whole new meaning. We know this to be true because after the resurrection, the disciples came out of hiding. They didn't run away from what scared them. Instead, they walked boldly into situations that God had called them to. And these followers of Jesus ended up changing our whole world because they started to live as though they believed what Jesus had told them over the course of their time together. Fear not. They were not afraid of anything, not even death, because they followed a man who had died and came back to life. And all of a sudden, nothing seemed as scary anymore. Not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because there was a God who was clearly bigger than any of their biggest fears. The thing is this, we all know that fear will always be a part of our experience. Fear is a part of what makes us human, and it will always be there to some degree. But we don't have to live like fear is in charge of us and telling us what to do. There's a guy by the name of Peter who was one of Jesus's closest friends. He was there with Jesus during the miracles on the boat rides. You know, the guy who promised that he wouldn't deny knowing Jesus, then denied him 3 times. The one that panicked when Jesus was arrested. Also the one that hid in fear after Jesus died. Yeah, that guy. But that same Peter gives us some tips about fear after he witnessed Jesus came back to life. In a letter he wrote to Christians who never had the chance to meet Jesus, this is what he had to say. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. When Peter says cast, he means throw as hard as you can. That's an action word. That means it doesn't happen by accident. When you feel anxiety, fear, or worry, take all of it and throw it at Jesus. This is the most important part. Peter experienced this firsthand in the 3 years he spent with Jesus. We throw our fears on him because he cares for us. You can also remember it this way. Because of Jesus, fear doesn't have to be the boss of you. So here's what I want you to do. When fear becomes the vibe that takes over your life and starts to control how you act, I want you to do this. First, name whatever it is that you are afraid of. Say it out loud. Put words all around it. What about it makes you afraid? What have you been through that makes you feel afraid? And the second thing, I want you to then talk to God. You can say something like, Jesus, I am throwing this fear towards you because I personally can't handle it. I am giving you my fear of trying to do everything right. Maybe the fear of trying to not be afraid of the dark anymore. Maybe it's the fear of not having so many friends. Whatever that fear is that you're dealing with, I want you to fill it in that blank and say, you care for me. And even though it doesn't always feel like it, I'm choosing to believe that you are bigger than any fear that I face. Because you faced death and came back to life, I can trust that you can handle any fear that I bring to you. So as we wrap up today, I hope you'll remember that these vibes, feelings, and emotions that we have don't have to control us, especially fear. They were never meant to make us who we are. They are, however, invitations to pay attention. So while we can learn from our emotions, we need to know that because of Jesus, they don't have to be the boss of us. So hey, here it is. The thing we face and the fear we feel can be a lot to handle. I get it, especially on our own, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's why small groups are so important. It's a place where you can share what you're actually going through with people who might be going through something similar. Being vulnerable with those around you and letting others be vulnerable with you opens a door and is one way we can decide not to let fear control us and to choose something way better. And that's hope. To experience hope for yourself and to give hope to others is incredible. So this week, try talking to a pastor, a friend, a small group leader, or a trusted adult about one fear you may be feeling. And I encourage you to try sharing that with your group. Then and only then, you can be bold and courageous to help each other. Fear not, my friends.